Thank you so much. I do have to say, this is a lot of people for a final keynote. Usually folks roll out by now, but I am deeply appreciative, and I think it speaks to the level of conversation, but also the level of expectation that I produce a good commentary at the end of the conference. But I do want to start by thanking Rhia Evans and whoever else thought of me for this moment, because I have to say, that after 15 years of intentional effort to advance racial equity and contemplate racial justice as a frame for addressing access to capital markets, designing and leading the first initiative addressing racial equity and endowment management in the field of philanthropy, 3 years of nonstop panels, webinars, workshops on said topics, and then taking the helm of a uniquely designed nonprofit that owns a venture fund and is doing work in reproductive and maternal health equity, that it's actually a Black woman doing Black things that invited me for my first keynote. So this is actually my first dedicated keynote, and thank you so much, Rhia, for seeing me as a possibility for this moment. So I appreciate all of you for being here, and if this is what it feels like for someone to give you your flowers, thank you. I deeply appreciate it. I do. And so, of course, once I was invited to speak, then I had to figure out what I was supposed to say. But I immediately said yes, even though I didn't know what to talk about, because who wouldn't jump at the chance to be in the midst of something called the Assembly of Black Possibilities, right? Like that's an invitation in and of itself. And whenever I can have a chance to connect with an explicit frame of Black communities, and discuss, share resources, develop partnerships, get in alignment, right, with the aim of improving the material conditions of Black people and Black communities, I'm in, I'm there. And I want to contribute and participate in any way that I can. Because I do spend more than my fair share of time navigating equity in white spaces. And I take that on as a role, right? Like that is what I've committed to do in social change. I see myself as a weaver in the ecosystem. And so I commit. And I do that, but it also is deeply meaningful to have focused and meaningful conversations in Black spaces. And these spaces that are created by us for us are essential, and I will always stand up for and show up in these spaces whenever I can. So again, thank you. And it's even more special for me just because when I'm asked about new models of ownership and what might a changed relationship to decision making with respect to capital look like, I point to Boston Ujima Project. And I tell people to fund them, root for them, support them, be curious, humbly, and not in an extractive way about their work. Because this is the future of capital. This is what's possible when we're intentional about who owns and who controls and who benefits from capital. And so when I spoke to Rhia to prepare for the keynote, I did ask, like, what on earth am I supposed to talk about? And she said, think about if Black possibilities were a field, what would you say the state of the field is? And I was like, what? Are you serious right now? Okay, I got it. I can do this. And so I did what I always do when I don't know where to begin. I Googled. Right, I got online, I Googled it, and of course I found a resource because I wanted to think about this through the lens of a field, right? Like if we're building fields, and what does it look like? And I came across the resource. Of course, it was by Bridgespan, and let's put that part aside. But it was a good one, and it talked about 3 stages of progression. Emerging, forming, and evolving and sustaining stage of field building, of when a social change field, a movement field is coming about, and 5 characteristics as well. So knowledge base, actors, field level agenda, infrastructure, and resources. And so I thought about what I know, what I've experienced, what I hear, what I research, and ran it through that diagnostic really quickly, just to understand what would I say about the state of the field of Black possibilities. And so if we think about knowledge base, and they talk about it as a field's knowledge base is the body of academic and practical research that helps actors better understand the problem, identify and analyze shared barriers to solving it, and develop solutions. And I know effectively that Black academics and scholars, practitioners in different fields have done this, right? Like, we have a solid knowledge base. We know what we're doing. We know how to address the problems that capitalism and racism, sexism, all the isms have created in society. We know what to do with that. So check, right? We got that. We got knowledge base covered. Actors. The field's actors are the set of individuals and organizations that together bring a sense of shared identity and common vision to the field. We got that, right? Like, we do have a clarity with respect to the ways in which centering Black communities, Black people, and transforming capital can move this work forward, and who is part of that ecosystem, not at the individual level, but in terms of some of the institutions and the systems that are essential. We're building our own at this point as well. So we do know who those actors are. The field level agenda. So a field level agenda refers to the strategic suite of approaches that aims to address shared barriers and unlock collective progress. It is co-created and continuously adapted by the field's actors, right? we know what we're doing here, right? We do have a field level agenda, and people are moving capital in different ways, everything from venture funding to more creative forms of capital to address those barriers. So in terms of the field level agenda, I think we're all aligned. We had many conversations today. I'm looking at the topics and sitting in on different sessions, talking about climate and racial equity, talking about reparations agenda. Like, we've got the agenda, and we have the common concepts squared away as well. Infrastructure. So field infrastructure is the connective tissue that strengthens each of the 4 field characteristics, as well as the complementarity between them. Infrastructure exponentially enhances the efforts of actors in the field by making them more coordinated, connected, and effective. This is infrastructure, right? When I think about people coming from all over the country to be part of this conversation, folks who I know, folks who I know of, and just meeting for the first time, all kinds of people who have been part of this work over time. And so when you think about infrastructure, thinking about the ways in which we're able to move quickly, move resources quickly, move relationships, time, talent, all of these things are part of the infrastructure. And to have a space like this, and I hope this is not the last one. This is, right, this is an annual, semi-biannual, what, monthly, quarterly, what? That this in and of itself is infrastructure. And so yet again, this is a check mark, right? Like, we've got this in terms of the field. And then resources, right? Like, that was number 5. So a field's resources comprise both financial forms of capital as well as non-financial support, and there it is, right? Like, that's that little piece. We have so much capital, social capital, cultural capital, relationship capital in Black communities. People wouldn't be here without that. And so we know what capital looks like, meaningful capital, right? Relationships, ideas, so much that exists in our communities that inspires Black possibilities. But it's the relationship to the history of Black people being capital and having access to it that is the barrier, right? Like, that is that piece of the work that has been out of our grasp. And in spite of that, we continue to, again, build the infrastructure as best we can, make the relationships, do the work of building the knowledge base, staying connected, and building our shared agenda. And so it's that last little piece, right? Like, the capital that has been really at the core of my work over these last 15 years. And as far back as 2007, so I was thinking about and reflecting on how I got here. And back in 2007, I organized a conversation among some folks who were part of the Association of Black Foundation Executives. We were program officers. Most of us were doing grant making, but happened to have one conversation with a Black asset manager who was asking us about, how do I access endowment money? And we were like, what are you talking about? Nobody accesses endowment money. We just see a group of white men down the hall and nobody knows what they do, but we just get our budget and that's it. And so he talked about being asked to make a gift to, I think it was like the New York Trust or something like that. And he said, okay, well, before you ask that, or before I give you an answer, who manages your endowment? And we were all sitting on the edge of our seat, like, what does this have to do with anything? And he said, if I don't have an opportunity to manage your endowment, then I'm not building my own wealth, and then therefore I don't have anything to give to you. So if you're sitting here asking me to make a gift to you, where do I have the conversation about managing the assets of this endowment as well? And that struck a chord with me, because it was a world that I knew nothing about. And so shortly after that, there were a series of random events, including a focused conversation with a group of APFI members. We talked about what is the significance of having Black asset managers in the endowment space, in foundations managing money, and thought about all these different knock-on effects, right, like that goes with that. A lot of times our natural networks lead us to funding Black businesses, very often, and that's professional services, or if we're making investments in businesses, we tend to be more philanthropic in our own communities, right? Like, so there were all these opportunities that would come from it. You know, people wield their capital to influence policy. Started to understand the relationship between a John Rogers and a Barack Obama, right? Like that had this person not existed with the resources, then that person wouldn't have had the opportunity. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this is a perfect, or even the system that we want. What I'm saying is, when I started to gain exposure to all the ways that it was actually moving and creating harm, creating opportunity, like that's what I wanted to start to be a part of. I wanted to figure this out. And because I came from outside of capital markets, when I finally took a job working for an institutional asset management firm, a Black-owned asset management firm, I really started to see the flow of capital, the volume, the fees that were being collected, and who was in control of all of this. And later on, there's this data point that floats, I think it was as recently as 2021, that of an $82 trillion asset management industry, less than 1.5% of it is under the control of, is under management by Black and women, or I should say actually people of color, BIPOC and women-owned asset management firms. So less than 1.5%. That's not a natural phenomenon, right? Like that's by design. And if we're not controlling it in some way, we have very little chance of changing it and changing where it goes. And so that's what I committed myself to addressing over time. And so when I left that firm and went to work for APFI, ended up taking a job, I launched the Smart Investing Initiative to think about applying a racial equity lens to endowment management practice. So if you think about foundations and all this money that they sit on, and they've got 95% of it that's being invested because they have to give away 5%. If you're making your money on things that are making your grant making necessary, how do you think your grants are gonna do anything, right? If I invest in something, I expect it to grow. I don't invest in things that I think are gonna fail. I invest in things that I think are gonna give me my money back, having multiplied itself. And so having a much more intentional lens on the ways in which this money was being invested, getting it in alignment with values, became the focus of my work while I was there. And shortly after starting this and thinking that, oh, once I tell people about this, sure, they'll be on board. They just hadn't thought about it yet. They knew. They knew. It wasn't that people hadn't thought about it. It was the system was so entrenched that people were saying things like, oh, well, that's just not possible. We have to have our return, as if these things couldn't happen together. And that's when I really started to understand this as a structural and systemic issue that had to be tackled that way. And so after leaving APFI, spending 2 years in a community foundation because I wanted to understand who and how are these decisions being made from the inside, and left, in 2018, I started the Racial Equity Asset Lab. I also became a fellow at the Beck Center at Georgetown, focused on equitable access to capital markets, and really tried to lean into my work and bring more people along. And had a whole strategy, right? We're gonna do some in-person meetings, I'm gonna show up in more places, I'm gonna try and get more people on board, and hosted an event in March of 2020. I think we know what happened shortly after that, and took everything online. And that was around the time, obviously, very shortly after, was when George Floyd was murdered. And then all of a sudden, everybody was focused on capital. All right, like I've been talking about this, people have been talking about this for years, but all of a sudden there was more of a consciousness about it. And was able to respond to a degree, but also realize like the readiness for a deep conversation about what it actually means to center racial equity, to actually create a frame around racial justice, it requires conversations and space to talk about the brutality of a system of slavery that dehumanized people for profit. So to be in a system today where people and planet are secondary concern or considered externalities in decision making, you gotta understand where that came from. And so having more and more conversations about that helped me to understand, one, how amazing, and I always knew Black people are amazing, but it kept reinforcing how amazing our communities are. And so to speak of Black possibilities, we were somebody's possibility, we are the possibility, and we're constantly imagining and reimagining. And those are the parts of this work that I think very often get overlooked. What does it mean to imagine a new world, a new existence? I tell y'all one thing, I am a mother of 2 teenagers. One of them is a competitive swimmer, one of them's a dancer. Y'all don't know how much gas I spend in a week running around. I travel, I run 2 organizations. Today was the first day in preparation for a speaking engagement that I took 20 minutes to rest. This is the first time I've ever had that opportunity at an event. So whoever conceived of that, you are brilliant and do it again. That's what it looks like, right? Like it was a choice, right? Like that is a choice. So much of what is happening, it's not immutable. These are not immutable laws of nature. These are choices that are being made over and over again, and we can make different choices. And so I speak a lot about racial equity and impact investing because I know that's the extent of what some folks can bear, but I'm very clear that equity is a floor, it's not a ceiling, and it's essential for justice and liberation, and that is what we aspire to. That's the goal, a radically changed world. So in this space of Black possibilities, I collected myself in a rest room, right? Like a literal rest room. Again, that's what possibility looks like. It's reclaiming, it's redefining, it's imagining spaces, events, ideas, the world. And in that regard, the state of Black possibilities, the field, the state of the field of Black possibilities is incredibly strong. And so I've been committed to improving the material conditions of Black people and communities. And I think we'll get, again, we all know reparations through public policy and a reckoning with private markets is really the one way that we're gonna get all of this done in a material sense. But what we have with respect to imagination, to possibility, to healing, to community, to relationship, that's strong, that's powerful, and that goes nowhere. And I'm proud to be part of a community today, to be with you all today, to consider Black possibilities. And so one, I hope everyone is proud of the work that's happened here, the conversations, the relationship, the partnership, the idea sharing that's happened in this space, and will continue to happen. So again, I thank you, Rhia, for inviting me into this space. It's been incredibly powerful, and I will be sending my donation and making sure it's matched from another organization, because I definitely believe in this work as well. So thank you all so much. I mean it when I say I have 2 teenagers, y'all, they're exhausting. So I do thank you all for allowing me to be here. Yesterday was my daughter's birthday, which is why I wasn't here for 2 days. But as you can tell, they're my world, right? And so the work that we do here creates different opportunities for them in the future and all of our children in the future. So that's what grounds me constantly. And again, I appreciate you for being here and for having me. I'm here as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Erika. So we're just going to chat for a little bit, and then we're going to open up to the audience for questions. First, I want to start off, I'm looking around to see who's here. So I want to share the gratitude. So people have been coming up to us and asking us, is this going to be an annual thing? No, it will not. It will not be an annual affair, primarily because we want to, I think, try to be as responsive to what we think is actually happening and not force it and not have it then become a chore or a burden. We launched Ujima in 2017. We've been refining, we've been learning, we've been developing, we've been building with our peers, learning from our peers. And it did finally feel like the right time to say, you know what? Let's create this conversation, and let's bring people from all over the U.S. and Canada who are doing amazing work. Let's have us in the same place. Let's center Black people, because we get talked about all the time by other people. And to your point about the state of the field, there's a crucial element missing from the work that we do, and that is us getting the capital and the resources that we generate for other people who talk about us, even in this space. And the material benefits do not accrue to our organizations. I'm tired of that happening. I'm gonna bust somebody out though, because I did say we are gonna do this in 2025 in partnership with the city of Chicago with Renee Hatcher and Stacy Sutton.
I'll be there.
But I started to talk about this because I said I wanted to share the gratitude, and so the other thing people say is, wow, how did you pull this off? And so the response is, it was not just Ujima. We have a staff team. We also worked with an event planning team. We also worked with a content planning team, and I'm trying to look around and I don't see her. But I want to say this gratitude should be shared with Sharnae Robinson-Williams. And I think she's in the staff room working right now of Make Justice Normal. I met Sharnae at another impact investing conference, and she worked very hard to get Ujima there. Anyone also who knows me knows I'm terrible at email. And she was very patient, very persistent. She got us to the conference, and she said, anything you would like us to help you with in Boston, I want to help you. And together, she and I started dreaming about what an impact investing conference would look like that centered Black people. And so I want to share the gratitude. So when you say thank you, I want to say thank you to Sharnae.
Absolutely.
The other bit of gratitude I want to share in response to the restroom is my team. So I'm looking at James Van Boy. And I'm looking at Ray Fielder, and as Jessica said, that Ray. And for y'all who don't know, Ray is that Ray because Ray is on Beyonce's Renaissance website. I'm also looking at Mary, who I don't think is in the room, is in the registrar room, but we first did a rest space when we did a collaboration at Institute for Contemporary Arts for Juneteenth. Also looking at Sierra. Also looking, who's here? Thank you. Also looking at Jija, who's in the back here. And Crystal, I don't know if Crystal's here. Okay, Crystal left. And then finally, a team member who is sick, who couldn't join us for this assembly, Mona. So again, just want to be sure to share gratitude in space.
I appreciate that.
Or gratitude and credit, I should say. First question for you, Erika. I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more. You didn't talk a whole lot about this. Can you talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing now with reproductive justice?
Sure. So in addition to founding the Racial Equity Asset Lab, right now I'm the CEO of Rhia Ventures. And so RHIA, that stands for Reproductive Health Investors Alliance. So this was established back in 2017, 2018, essentially to make the case for investing in women's health. So we're 50% of the population. We birth 100% of it. Yet less than 2% of healthcare funding, venture funding, was going to women's issues. So this is why who control capital matters. And so at this stage, Rhia leverages capital to advance reproductive and maternal health equity by centering the voices, the perspectives, the experiences of historically marginalized groups. And so we do that through venture investing. It's a nonprofit that owns a venture fund that makes direct investments in innovations in women's health. We organize corporate engagement and shareholder advocacy. So we do organize investors who hold shares in publicly traded companies to submit proposals, file proposals in alignment with reproductive health rights and justice. So that's become much more relevant in the last year, and I think we were supporting about 30 different proposals that went in to different companies. And that could be anything ranging from what are your HR and healthcare coverages, and is that made public to women and birthing people in your workforce, to what's your data privacy? Are you a hospital if you're publicly traded? Have you made public statements about protecting physicians and their data if they are providing access to abortion? So leveraging, again, capital in the public markets to advance that agenda. We also focus on narrative change. So whose stories are being told? What are the dominant narratives that are creating harm, and how do we transform those intentionally with respect to reproductive health rights and justice? And then finally, again, field building, right? So how do we build a field, this emergent field of women's health, so that it is from the ground up done through an equity lens, so we don't have to go back and remind people how to figure out how to ensure that Black women's health matters, that Indigenous women's health matters, that where people live matters to how they're able to access healthcare and innovation as well. So that's the work that I lead at Rhia.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up question. Why? How did you land there? Why now?
Which is a good question, because that's not my background. Repro is not my background. It was because of the knowledge that I have with respect to decision making, right? Like bringing a different lens to decision making, financial decision making, and quite frankly, being able to call bullshit from time to time when people say, "Oh, that's not possible because we got to get a return on capital." Why is this incompatible? I'm just telling you, here are the additional things that you can do. But because of the work that I had done previously, I think I was a reasonable candidate for the role, and engaged a team with deep knowledge and expertise in the field. So, chief health officer and our ecosystem building team and the narrative change and our corporate engagement team that have relationship in the field, et cetera. But it was something that interested me because I wanted to know what changed about decision making if a nonprofit owned a venture fund. And so we do pursue market rate return, but I wanted to know what changed in terms of the impact, right? Like if it has to be mission first, what's different in the process? And if we can do that in this structure, then that's possible just in the general structure of this work as well. So that's why I decided to take it on.
Thank you, Erika. So I appreciate your Googling. I appreciate
At least it wasn't ChatGPT.
What'd you say?
It wasn't ChatGPT.
At least it wasn't ChatGPT.
It was
Google. And so I appreciate you thinking about this notion of a field, and what makes a field and what are the characteristics to have a place to evaluate it. So I think if I heard you correctly, if I understand you correctly, you talked about 3 stages of a field. And then you talked about kind of 5 characteristics. And you said check, 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 check on the first 4, and then kind of a half a check on the 5th one. So then is it fair to say that the state of Black possibilities is a healthy field?
I think absolutely, yes. And as I was thinking about it through that lens of what we have, right? Like the assets that we are and that we have as a field. Absolutely, it's a healthy field. And that last piece is the part, it's the sustaining, right? Like that's the part that the capital helps to sustain, right? So it is evolving. We're already imagining and developing new structures and strategies, but it's the sustaining that gets difficult when the resources, when the access to the capital isn't there, or you've got to work twice as hard instead of, in my context, at birth centers, catching babies, you got to work twice as hard trying to keep it funded, then that just makes it that much harder to move your work forward and sustain it. And so I think that's just that's the half part, right?
Thank you. I appreciate that. And this might not be a fair question.
You're gonna ask
So
it
let me,
anyway.
I'm gonna ask it anyway. But also let me know. Also let me know if it's not the fairest question. So thinking about the future of the field and this kind of, and I appreciate you talked about sustaining the field, and this last piece with regards to capital. Do you already have an imagined future for the field writ large? Do you already have an imagined future for this piece with regards to financial capital? And then parenthetically within that, very specifically with regards to Black control of financial capital.
Oh, goodness. Right, who said, right, that's a, okay. Fair question. I don't know that I have, I don't know that I have answers for all of that, honestly. Because I think about the future is here, right? Like this is the future, the things that were being talked about today, the things that people are creating right now. That is the future. And when, excuse me, the reason I focused in on the space that I did, because we do have to unlock this capital. We got to figure it out, whether it's through policy or through, I don't know what other means, but we've got to figure this out because that's where the opportunity, right? Like to just even try stuff. It doesn't even have to work, but to be able to try things. We don't even get the opportunity to try. And so how do you get those resources unlocked? And so the reason I focused in on the space that I did was I was thinking, if I can't get people to actually change the who, they're literally doing the same exact decision making, right? Like it's been going on. If I can't even get you to think about who does it differently, how am I going to get everything else tapped, right? Like how am I going to get you to think more creatively about like the structure of asset allocation or something like that? Because you can't even see a Black woman just managing the same way, right? Like a white man does. And so for me, that's just where I decided to focus in. That said, I am well aware that there are so many other different ways of who should be owning this, who should be making decisions, who should be prioritized in the return, right? And so how do we do this a little bit differently? So I think those are the things that are happening, right? So a Boston Ujima Project, that's why I literally tell people, oh, no, go see Boston Ujima Project if you want to understand what the future looks like, right? Like if we want to understand what a different system can be, there are places where it's happening, right? And so look at those things, fund them, make sure that they're supported, is kind of where I try to help that imagining go, because we've got to build these things up. Because when I talk about the amount, I mean $40 billion pension funds, right? Like where does that go? We need to be able to absorb that. And so for me, the future is building up all these other different types of resources, having the infrastructure to connect, so that is the future, right? Like there is some place for these resources to land when we figure that out, when we unlock it.
Thank you, Erika. And then I think this will be my last question.
Okay.
Before I open it up for questions from the audience. You've mentioned field building a couple of times. In general, both with some of your past experiences as well as your current experience. What, for us, does field building look like for the state of Black possibilities?
I don't know, y'all. What does it look like? What we doing? I think that's what I would want to know, is how to participate in that as well. Like I don't know that I can say what that would be, because again, I've been working in one particular the focused area thread, but it's whatever we say it is, right? So what does field building look like? I think it does have everything to do with how resources flow and where they flow, the ability to bring folks together on a regular basis in a way that doesn't have you pulling your hair out and thinking, no, we're not doing this again next year, right? So that there's this spaciousness about the way that we have freedom to build the field as we see fit, that it's not scrutinized. Because it's going to be different. There's going to be a rest room, right? There are going to be things that are just different about the way the field emerges. because there's going to be healing. That has to be a part of it, right? Like, so there are ways in which the field has to move that currently frames like Bridgespan, they can't hold it because it doesn't exist yet. Right? Like we're piecing it together now.
And psych, I have one more question for you. So on that note, because you talked about the restroom in your opening, thank you, and you just mentioned it again. And when we spoke, you mentioned self-care is actually in your mind.
Yes.
Right now. And you talked about that a little bit. You have teenagers, but can you just say more? It's on your mind right now. Can you just say more about that?
I mean, we all do really hard work, right? So, and it's it can be really emotionally draining. And so many times we see self-care in the frame of a candle or you need to meditate more. And I'm not saying that those things aren't meaningful or useful, but more and more I think about self-care in terms of my values. Like, what is it that I truly believe, what grounds me and values, and how do I get in alignment with that? And when I started thinking that way, I was like, ooh, this is going to be hard. This is going to be really, really hard because I do value rest and restoration. And I'm not living that way, if I'm going to be honest. And so, constantly on flights, constantly on Zooms, right? Like constantly writing proposals, all the grind of it, that's got me out of alignment with my values. And so what is it that I have to do differently so I can get in alignment with values? So I've been thinking about self-care and recently read a book called Real Self-Care that was talking about that. And it's written by a woman by the name of Pooja Lakshman, but she definitely gives deference to Black feminists who talk about rest as a radical act, and there is no more radical act than Black people to take rest, right? Like to decide to rest. And so that's just an example of how I've been starting to think about and reframe my understanding of self-care.
And in addition to that, what you also talked about was, as you said, we're not just talking about candles and meditating and bubble baths. We are talking about systems. So do you want to just say a little more about that when we talk about self-care, how we kind of look past our nose, so to speak, and think about systems and policy?
Ooh, you do not ask easy questions. Sometimes, and very I think when we're clear about those values alignment, that it does have a system effect, even if it's at an individual level. So as I keep going back to the restroom, right? And what it would mean, and Black people always set in trends. We set trends everywhere. So as soon as it gets out that this is a thing, all of a sudden you're going to see these popping up at all the conferences and everything, and no one's going to attribute it to the Assembly of Black Possibilities. I am saying it, and if I see it in another conference, I'm calling it out. But those are the ways in which I think we understand moves or shifts to start happening as well. So having collective decisions about what it is that we believe is in alignment with values, and making sure that that is part of the structures that we create, the organizations that we develop, the policies that we promote, I think is how we start to catalyze some of the systems change that's necessary, because we're responding to a system, right, that has not seen us as valuable as human. And so reclaiming our humanity is just core to all of it.
Thank you. Thank you. No, that really is it.
That's right.
Thank you, Erika. I just want to give one parameter, just one for Q&A. Ray's used to this for me. So we are going to go to Q&A, and I do want to throw this field building question as well to the audience, because Erika said, I don't know, what do y'all think? So I invite questions, and I also would like to ask our peers, because we are surrounded by peers from all over the place. I'm not going to call anybody out, but I'm looking at Avery Ebron, for example, from Atlanta. So feel free to also share what you think field building for the state of Black possibilities looks like. And now, Ray, you can take it away with Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, thank y'all. So we've been doing it all the last 2 days. If you have questions or comments, please line up right here. We'll take a few, and wrap it on up. Don't be shy now.
Is there a reception after? Am I standing between people with their beverages? Okay.
Questions, comments, concerns? Yeah, because we want to see you. We're capturing all of this.
So I don't have a question, but I just wanted to reference our conversation from last night. Actually, we were talking about like just having more opportunities to be together, eat, talk, because no matter what, that's when the possibilities come out. And so unconferencing also came up as just like a similar framework, or I guess it's almost like the opposite of a framework in that sense. But having a way that we're still gathering more frequently to discuss and check in and move from there. So my name is Imani. I'm based in Athens, Georgia. Find me in the app, we can connect, figure out how we're gonna get together and eat soon.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, I'm seeing.
Hey everybody, I'm Lumber Dan from Kansas City. Woo, woo. Field building. So one of the things that has really kind of been on my heart since we've been here is I want to challenge everybody to scale, because it sounds like the trauma that we are experiencing is at a really large scale, but our solutions are so micro that it doesn't have enough catalytic effect. So when we think about field building, if you start saying like, these are black possibilities, these are black possibilities, and then we think about like a solution for a handful of people, it's really hard to build a field when the scale is not there. And a lot of the conversations that we've had about lack of capital, lack of equity, lack of all this, it just feels like we're not dreaming big enough as a community when it gets to money and resources. And just a little, the reason why we bought a lumber yard is because we stopped thinking, how do we build a handful of houses, to how do we build 10,000 houses, 20,000 houses, 50,000 houses. So when you start to think about scale, you start to think about systems. And I think that this community has the dopest people I've been around in a long time. And they all look like me, except for a few of y'all. The quotas. But when you think about field building, like I want to challenge everybody to think bigger, to dream bigger. We have the abundance. So just think about like what level do you need to stop thinking about like I can manage this, to like if I don't have somebody else collaborate with me, it's not possible. So I want everybody to kick up your scale. I want to challenge everybody to do that, because that is field building. That's why we're all here, is because there's a scalable idea that's here. So I thank y'all, and I appreciate this.
Stand up. All right. I know. I knew you was about to I knew you was going to go there. That's why I was like, I'm going to stand up because I don't want to hear your mouth. Okay. I don't even know you like that. Like, dang. I'm really curious, state of Black possibilities. Sometimes I feel like we are, the question really is, how prepared are Black people for their possibilities? That's really the question. Like, out of the trauma, out of the relationships, all of these things, sometimes I find that what we're measuring ourselves against is white possibility, white imagination, and we're not always really believing in our own possibilities. And so as we talk about what the state of Black possibilities are, what words would you share with us about how ready we are as Black folks to receive and step into the full imagination and birthright and all of the things that are really brimming and bubbling up here in the room?
That's a good question, and I mean I like that is a deeply good question about how we think about that, because who was talking about earlier? I think we were talking about narrative, right? Like how important narrative is, because it shapes your beliefs, and so starting to question the narratives that are shaping some of our beliefs. And just because something has existed for a particular way for a particular amount of time doesn't mean it can't change. And quite frankly, I have to think about that. I have to remind myself of that very often, because some days I wake up, I'm like, what is the point? Why am I doing this? This is ridiculous. And then I remember I'm living in someone else's imagination, what somebody else wanted to create for my existence as a Black woman in the United States of America. So that's why it's important, because that was a narrative that wasn't true. And so for me, sometimes it is just the examining the narrative and how dominant it is, and just being willing to poke holes in that, and reframing over and over again. Use the word imagination that gets overlooked in some spaces when we talk about capital, but really that's what we're talking about, is the imagination and the reminding ourselves this has to get different. Like, we have to do this in a different way. What got us here is not going to be what gets us to a different end state or different place on the journey.
Yeah. Oh, you're in line? Sorry. You're next. You're next.
Thank you. I think in some ways I want to just put an exclamation point on, was it Lumberjack?
Lumberdan.
Lumberdan, I'm sorry. Like a book, right? Like my bad. Sorry. No, but for seriously. Because what I was moved by so much of what we've been doing together. And at the same time, I'm looking for and leaving with the idea of what's possible for us as we work collectively, right? The idea that scaling doesn't have to be scaling up. How do we become larger? We have scale as we scale out, right? And as we build our networks out. And so I've been going across the country trying to do a bunch of whatever, it doesn't matter what I'm trying to do. But the point being, well, so I'm working on a book called Real Black Utopias. Ooh. And so I'm looking at ecosystems across the country that are Black-led, Black-centered, solidarity economy ecosystems, right? So I'm traveling to 15 different cities to really understand the ideologies, the infrastructures, and the practices of that, right? And it's so beautiful to look out. Right? And I'm also just trying to understand how we use the same spaces and not be afraid of the word solidarity, collectivism, cooperation. Right? We're doing it. And so the narrative is really amplifying that work and that narrative so that we're not afraid, that we don't have to keep kind of running back to what's familiar in the individualist kind of tendency, right? We can be whatever you want to call them. There are millions of types, not millions, there's many types of socialisms, collectivisms, cooperation. And that is where we thrive. That's our shit, right? We know how to do that. We just have to hold on to that and really amplify that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When is that book coming out? Did she say when her book's coming out? Okay.
Sis, what's sis name? What did she say? Sis.
You want to know your name? Stacy.
Yeah. So I just want to.
Sutton is the last name. Stacy Sutton.
No. Sister Stacy literally prefaced what I wanted to say, and I've said it individually to some folks here. Is that my undergrad years at Brown, my second major was African American Studies, because I made a decision in high school that I need to know more about my history, my culture, than what we get, in public school systems, right? It's not a deep dive. And so when I first got introduced to Dr. Karenga, the Nguza Saba, right? The 7 principles of Kwanzaa, what hit me from the early 80s, and it stayed with me, is we formally celebrate Kwanzaa December 26th to January 1st. But our greatness, when we talk about our history, the ancient kingdoms of Nubia and et cetera, is we need to be doing Nguza Saba 24/7, 365. That is what gets us to possibilities unlimited, because there's nothing that we can't do based on our history if we do the Nguza Saba 24/7, 365. So that is my challenge to everybody here, my intention is everybody that I connected to one-on-one, took photos with, I'm gonna be staying in touch on at least a quarterly basis, because we need to start thinking Nguza Saba 24/7, 365. Take what we've connected to here and leverage it and start doing some work to move us forward.
Sister, just wanted to say thank you. Really appreciated your words. Very inspiring as well. So I actually want to learn a little bit more after, if I could pull what I wanted to offer in context to the field building, lumber.
Dan.
Love it. So I throw something in a very generative way back your way of working in the macro and like what it looks like for us to work in the micro as well. And so a lot of the work that we see, particularly in our neighborhoods, in Memphis, is an opportunity for us to be thinking about field building, I think like through 3 key areas. And I think it is closely connected to like impact investment, because there's gotta be resources that field the learning that we don't have in our families or in our communities, right? And that's not in our school systems, right, anymore, that we've always kind of had to pull from the community. But the systems like strip that away. So I would offer part of field building would look at like paid fellowships, right? They can do this root cause analysis piece, that ideas that come out of asking why. When we see this full spectrum, right? We understand racism is at the bottom, capitalism, but a lot of times you ask folks like, what are the barriers that are holding them back? And they may not be able to qualify that right away with real stories that actually change the way that people think in that moment, right? And that goes through a root cause process. The second one I would offer is around valuation. So this idea of not evaluation, but valuation creating from within communities, it's the narrative work. But the narrative work that we don't often get to be able to do because we don't have the paid time to be able to do that. And then the other one is traditional organizing that allows and teaches us how to confront power, but not just confront hard power, but confront soft power, and like what it means for us to navigate and negotiate those types of conversations. So I offer that because we were talking about impact investment, and they need to be paid. Like, it's so difficult to do all of this and a volunteer and get to the depth that allows for something that combats our time. And I personally believe with that kind of investment, then we get to the deeper thing around liberation and culture, because we will deposit ourselves into that process.
Thank you. We're going to hear from 3 more people who are pre-selected. So
Thank you. Hey y'all, I'm Nat McKellar Crosby. I'm from Richmond, Virginia. I just wanted to thank y'all for having this event. This has been amazing. So thank y'all for having this event. And I just wanted to make a comment and trying to connect what you were saying about if Black people were ready to receive, and the field work that needs to be done, scaling, and the trauma that we have to overcome. And I think the thread here is our collective self-esteem, right? And uplifting the self-esteem of Black folks across the diaspora in order to be ready, in order to have the ability to scale, right? To fight back against the traumas that we've all had to face and endure. And so we do have a good ancestor. There's not much out here about self-esteem in Black folks, but we do have a good ancestor, Bell Hooks, who wrote an amazing book called Rock My Soul. And it's all about Black people and self-esteem. And so I think that's something that we could all take back, take some time and read it and try to implement that in all of our works. Because I think that is one of the key pieces that we're all kind of tapping on here, right? Is the self-esteem piece in trying to address the traumas that we've endured. So thank y'all again.
Thank you.
Avery.
Thank you. I'm Avery Ebron from the Gill out of Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you so much for this experience. This is the best conference I've been to, and just want to give y'all big hands up for that. Yeah. Thank you, Ray. I don't have a whole lot. Oh, sorry. I don't have a whole lot to say beyond what has already been said. For me, in terms of field building and Black possibilities, when I think of possibilities, what undergirds that is hope. And hope is a very, very important and deep concept. And I know a lot of us have the audacity to hope every day, and we hold in so much. I think the biggest takeaway I have from this conference is increase my hope, not just in myself, but in the field. But I also know there are a lot of hopes on us, like in our work, in our communities, and we want to, uphold that. We know that hope is not free. We know that hope is fragile, and that's something that we, charge ourselves with each day, and that can become a burden, especially with all of the work that we're doing, a lot of it unpaid. And for field building, I guess my only comment would be, and I think Lumberdan talked about this as well, is just in that process of holding up, in that process of all of the hopes that we hold in our community as well, in terms of field building, how we connect with each other in our local ecosystems. So when that burden gets heavy, when those tough times come up, we can come together like we did at this conference, and we have that to fall back on as a community. I don't know what that might look like in practice, but I know for us, there are times where, things get rough and rocky and you're hoping for it, but it really helps when you have that community of people that you're seeing doing the same thing. You can collaborate and partner. So however that might manifest itself, that's my one comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to have our final comment from Tamashi.
Thanks, that Ray. I had to fight for this spot. All my life I had to fight. Thank you, Boston Ujima Project, for all that you do all year round and for this and for bringing us all together. I guess I just wanted to say thank you again and to encourage everyone here who has enjoyed all that that we have together here together. I said that already. The Boston Ujima Project has weekly meetings. The Boston Ujima Project is a membership-based organization. I'm a solidarity member, so we don't have to be here in Boston to participate. The last panel before this one, thank you so much for that, Keynote. The panel before this one, we were talking about possibilities for Black recovery, for Black collective recovery. I and another sister here are members of a fellowship that started during the pandemic and has continued to meet for 3 years. There are many rooms for Black people and for people of the global majority and for BIPOC people to check in with each other. There are places where I'm expected every single week, and when I don't show up, people are texting me like, "You okay? We miss you. You okay? You okay?" And it, like under the larger umbrella of recovery that we all deserve. And what everybody comes in dealing with every week is some sort of impact of systemic racism, of misogyny, of anti-trans, anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ, the reality that we're all living with. So saying that, there are places where people are getting together. Everyone here is welcome. And the Boston Ujima Project weekly meetings, Solidarity membership is a way station for all of us to keep coming back. Just as everyone who's gotten up here has said, we don't want to let this go. We don't have to. So I want to encourage everyone to continue to employ Zoom as we had to during the lockdown. A bunch of us are continuing to use it as a tool to bring BIPOC people together in ways that we can't normally get together physically because we're logging in from all over the world. And we just don't, it's just like not, we can't do this all the time physically, So I want to encourage you all to, if you're not already a member, become a member. You don't have to be here in Boston to be a member. You can be a Solidarity member. There are meetings that happen weekly. There are workshops, art and culture workshops that happen. You could be a workshop leader. I'm looking at you from RISD. Lead a workshop, be engaged, be involved, and continue to use the Boston Ujima Project at large as your place to continue this feeling, to continue this building for our sustainable future. Thank you, everyone, for the work that you've done.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Tamashi's our natural ambassador. As you can see, we did not pay her to do that. That does remind me, on that note, we do have a translocal membership program that we created. that we created to be in deep relationship and partnership with Black communities around the U.S. who want to create something like a Ujima where they are. And I say something like a Ujima because it doesn't have to be a replica. It doesn't have to be an imitation. We're not looking to own any kind of franchises or chapters or anything like that. And want to put the emphasis on the point that Stacey Sutton made with regards to scale. And this is a way to scale out and not just scale up. We have, I don't know if John Jenkins is in the room from We Are the Ones in Houston, who just signed on to become one of our translocal members today. And Justin from Memphis, Tennessee, that organization is Center for Transforming Communities. We're talking about translocal membership. So along the lines of individual membership, what's your org? Grow House in Brooklyn. So raising their hands for translocal membership. So along the lines of individual membership, ways that our peers, organizations can, to Tamashi's point, continue to be in relationship with us beyond the space is our translocal membership program. And it looks like we got 3 new ones out of this space today. Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all, we have made it to the closing of the Assembly of Black Possibilities. Let's give it up for that.